In today's fast-paced world, deploying cloud resources in 2 or more multiple steps is actually a tedious process. And this is where tools such as Vultr API and Vultr CLI come in to enable you to deploy resources faster with more control and flexibility to actually access these deployed resources. Hello there, Humphrey Pyre here and I'm a developer API here at Vultr. In today's Tech Talk, join me in discussing how you can actually deploy cloud resources using Vultr API and Vultr CLI to enable you to have faster deployments with seamless management options. To begin with, what's Vultr API anyway? Vultr API is a set of HTTP endpoints that actually adhere to RESTful design principles and support create, read, update, and delete operations, also known as CRUD, to actually deploy resources using HTTP requests to your Vultr account. Vultr API integrates with infrastructure as code tools such as Terraform, Crossplane, and Terragram to enable you deploy resources using configuration files or specific application code. On the other hand, Vultr CLI is a wrapper for Vultr API that deploys resources using commands. Vultr CLI supports most operating systems including Windows, Mac OS, Linux, and BSD systems. It's compatible with native scripting tools such as Bash, Python, to actually enable you to integrate multiple commands to deploy resources to your Vultr account. And how this works, whether you're using Vultr CLI on a workstation running Windows, Linux, or Mac OS, or whether you're using Vultr API with tools such as Terraform, direct call requests, or Crossplane, both methods use your Vultr API key to actually deploy all types of resources that you may need on your Vultr account. Whether you need a Vultr Kubernetes Engine cluster, a Vultr Cloud Compute instance with any operating system of your choice, or any other infrastructure resources in multiple Vultr locations. And by using Vultr API or Vultr CLI, you actually benefit from quick access to Vultr Cloud services, simplified resource management for all deployed resources, integration with automation tools that allows you to define resources into a single command instead of multiple steps. And in addition, you have advanced resource control and flexibility over all deployed resources on your Vultr account. And so, based on this background, let me take you right into a demo process where we shall actually deploy resources using Vultr API and Vultr CLI. Among the resources that we actually get to deploy include Vultr Cloud Compute instances, Vultr Managed Databases, and Vultr Object Storage. And so, without any further ado, let's get right into this process. So, to get started with our demo, to use either Vultr API or Vultr CLI, you need an active Vultr API key. And to actually enable a Vultr API key, simply navigate to the Vultr customer portal, click Account on the left navigation menu, find this API menu option within the Other section, and as you can see in this output, my account does not have an active API key. So let's go ahead and actually enable a Vultr API key right here. So simply click Enable API. And so you can see that we have enabled Vultr API access on my account. Right within the personal access section, you can see the Vultr API key is listed right here. We can use this Vultr API key to actually deploy multiple resources on my Vultr account. And if you focus on the access control section, you can see that my public IP address is automatically detected and allowed to access this Vultr API key. If you have specific workstations that you would like to access this API key, ensure to list them right here with the proper subnet in order to grant them access to your Vultr API key. So, now that we have access to the Vultr API key and my host is actually allowed to access this API key, let's go ahead and set up this API key on our system in order to make sure that we can deploy resources using either Vultr API or Vultr CLI. For example, I'm using a Windows workstation, and to actually set up the personal access token on a Windows workstation, simply go to the search bar here and enter System Variables to access this Edit System Variables control panel option. Right within the Open dialog, click Environment Variables, click New, and for the variable name, let's use Vultr API key in all caps. Let's paste in our API key value right here and click OK. Let's click OK again to save changes and let's click OK. So now my workstation can correctly use this Vultr API key with my Vultr API or Vultr CLI operations on this machine. And now that we have set up this API key on my Windows workstations, let's see how you can do that on Linux or Mac OS. So for instance, I have a management workstation that is running Linux right here. So let's just create a new environment variable for Vultr API key and make sure that we paste in our Vultr API key again right here. So by doing this, we have enabled access to the Vultr API key. So whichever commands we run here, whether Vultr API or Vultr CLI, they can actually work. So right on this Vultr API page, you can see that we have a couple of options and endpoints we can use to actually deploy specific types of resources on our Vultr account. For instance, expand this instances page, and as you can see right into this subset of options, we have list instances, create, get, update, delete, and all types of endpoints that you may actually need to deploy cloud compute instances on your Vultr account. So right on this create instance endpoint, you can see that we have a couple of required fields. These include the region, where a region ID is required, and plan, where a plan ID is required, and OS ID, which has to specify the target operating system to actually deploy on this cloud compute instance. And so to actually see what available regions we can actually use to deploy these resources, just go to the list regions endpoint and copy this CAL request to actually query all available regions. And if you run this, you will see all available Vultr locations, and you should keep note of the ID value. For instance, AMS stands for Amsterdam, whereas an ID such as ATL will stand for Atlanta. So you need to keep note of these region IDs to actually deploy your cloud compute instance. Next, let's actually navigate to this list plans endpoint and actually verify what available plans we can actually employ on our Vultr cloud compute instance. So copy this CAL request again, and if we navigate back to our terminal session and run it, you'll see that we have multiple types of instance plans we can choose from and availability per location. For instance, you can see Vultr optimized compute with 8 virtual CPUs, 32 GB memory, and you can see this in detail in this particular column right here. So to actually get the operating system ID that we actually need to deploy on our cloud compute instance, just navigate to this list OS endpoint and copy the CAL request again. And let's navigate to our terminal session and paste it right here. And as you can see, we have multiple IDs per operating system. For instance, if I'm interested in a particular distro, such as Ubuntu, let's just pipe this output to a command line grep and search for Ubuntu. And as you can see, the output is marked very well. So let's focus on Ubuntu 24.04, which is the latest LTS version at this moment. And its ID is 2284. So you need this ID to actually specify it when deploying your instance. And if you navigate right on this create instance endpoint, you can see that we have all types of resources that we actually need to get started. These include the region, plan, and OS ID as we've seen in the output. So you simply have to note the particular type of resource that you need. And now to create our instance, let's just go ahead and copy this example request right here. And now let's navigate back to the terminal session, and this time around let's paste this, but actually modify this request a little bit. So EWR stands for the Vultr New Jersey location, and now within the plan section we have VC2, which is for Vultr Cloud Compute with 6 virtual CPUs and 16 gigs of RAM. And within OS ID, let's go ahead and use the operating system ID that we actually chose earlier, which is 2284 for Ubuntu 24.04, which is the latest LTS version. And now let's go to the hostname field and change this to something like sample. So once you press enter, you can see that the instance is actually deployed with this ID. So to verify that, let's head to the Vultr customer portal and right within products, click compute to actually see that we have a new instance with the name example instance using Ubuntu in the Vultr New Jersey location, and the status is running. And if you switch back to our terminal session, you can see that all this matches our instance specifications. So next up, let's actually see how you can deploy these resources using Vultr CLI instead. So if you navigate to the Vultr CLI project page right here, you can see that it supports multiple operating systems and multiple tools. For instance, if you're using Mac, you can use Homebrew to actually run the Homebrew install Vultr CLI command to actually install Vultr CLI. And on Windows, simply use chocolately with the command choco install Vultr CLI. And upon installation, you actually get access to the latest Vultr CLI version. And now, once that is done, you have access to all Vultr CLI commands, such as regions, plans, OS, object storage, Kubernetes, and all types of resources that you may need to deploy in your Vultr account. And to begin with Vultr CLI, let's actually deploy a sample resource. And this time around, let's actually deploy a Vultr managed database for MySQL. So let me use this demo command right here. It uses Vultr CLI database with the create command with the database engine set to MySQL using this particular string, the database engine version to version 8, and in the Vultr New Jersey location, which is EWR, with the plan Vultr DBS startup, which is the startup plan for Vultr managed database. And to change the label, let's actually modify it to example database MySQL and press enter. And now, as you can see this output, we have actually deployed a Vultr managed database. Let's actually navigate to the Vultr customer portal to see if this change is actually real and correct. So if you go into the Vultr customer portal, click databases, and as you can see on this managed databases page, you can see that we have deployed a new managed database with the name example database MySQL. It uses the MySQL database engine in the Vultr New Jersey location, and the status is rebuilding. If you notice in this Vultr CLI output, you can see the status is rebuilding. And let's actually see all databases that are actually deployed to this Vultr account. So if we use the command Vultr CLI database list, it will actually show all available databases. If you notice right here, you can see the status is still rebuilding. And you can see we have all types of information that we actually need for this Vultr managed database. For instance, we have the hostname right here, the user, and the generated password we can use to actually access this database. And to actually experiment with Vultr CLI even further, let's actually go ahead and query all cluster IDs that we actually have. Cluster IDs actually resonate with Vultr locations, but these locations particularly have object storage in them. So if you run Vultr CLI object storage list clusters and press enter, you can actually see that we have a couple of IDs we can actually use. So for instance, the ID 6 stands for the Vultr Amsterdam location, the ID 8 for the Vultr Delhi location, and the ID 2 for the Vultr New Jersey location, which is EWR. So you need this cluster ID to actually deploy a Vultr object storage resource using Vultr CLI. And next up, let's go ahead and actually deploy our Vultr object storage. So by running Vultr CLI object storage create with an integer value, which is the cluster value, and this time around we use the fig of 2 and a simple label such as example storage, and let's actually modify it a little bit to actually include example storage production. And when you press enter, you can see that we have actually deployed a Vultr object storage instance and the status is pending. And now if we go to the Vultr customer portal to verify this change, expand cloud storage and click object storage, you will see that we have a new object storage resource that has just been deployed at this very moment, and in the status is just installing. The name is example storage prod as we've defined it in the Vultr CLI command. And just like we have accessed this Vultr object storage instance using the Vultr customer portal, we can do the same using Vultr CLI by running Vultr CLI object storage list. And if you see in the output right here, our object storage has actually turned to active, and we have its hostname, its S3 access key, and its secret key right here. So you can use these credentials to actually get to access your Vultr object storage without even going into the web browser to access the Vultr customer portal. And so just to recap, we have actually deployed Vultr object storage using the Vultr CLI tool, and we have actually deployed a Vultr Cloud Compute instance using the Vultr API. If you navigate to the databases page right here, you can see that managed database that we have deployed using Vultr CLI. And if you go to compute, you can actually see the cloud compute instance that we actually deployed with Vultr API. So all these tools actually give you more flexibility to actually deploy resources, access them without going into multiple steps that can be tedious and less flexible for you to actually deploy resources on your Vultr account. All in all, as we have explored in our demo process, you can deploy Vultr Cloud resources using Vultr API and Vultr CLI. You can actually integrate Vultr API with tools such as Terraform, Crossplane, TerraGrant, Pulumi, or whichever actually favors your workflow to actually deploy resources on your Vultr account in a much faster fashion possible. Vultr CLI can also integrate with CLI tools which accept commands to actually deploy resources that match your specifics and Vultr locations that you may need to actually have these resources up and running. And so, by using Vultr API and Vultr CLI, your deployments are much faster, and you not only have access to the instance credentials, but also other management options that you may not be able to access in the Vultr customer portal. And so, I hope you did find this tech talk useful. If you did, I'd like to thank you for watching and wish you the best on your next deployment using Vultr API or Vultr CLI on your workstation. Once again, thank you for watching and see you in the next Vultr Tech Talk.